President-elect Donald Trump is set to be sworn into office for a second term today, this time as the 47th U.S. president. Both Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance are set to take the oath of office at the Capitol. They'll begin a new administration amid a long day of celebrations that'll include musical performances and a parade. Trump will have tea with outgoing President Joe Biden at the White House ahead of the inauguration. All right, well, let's unpack this as we build up to now just hours away from that inauguration. We're joined by Dean Bhebhe, who is a senior Just Transitions and campaign advisor at Power Shift Africa. Dean, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. The day has arrived. It is the 20th of January. What's your sort of blanket analysis on what this means for the US? And we'll get to Africa and the rest of the world in a moment.
Right. Thank you so much for inviting me again to the show. If we look at All Change International's analysis, they've actually labeled today as Trump's day one climate destruction package, where we see we are accelerating towards this uncharted climate chaos where with Trump set to assume office again and his plans to abandon the Paris Agreement threaten to derail the global climate progress, really. And however, one of the main key issues remaining is the idea around how one man and one election may temporarily cloud the horizon, but that cannot necessarily halt the relentless momentum of climate action. If anything, such moments are an invitation for historically polluting nations to step forward, not with the rhetoric, rather, of obstruction, but with the deeds of redemption. The world is watching, and we've seen enough bluster, and now is the time for genuine action. The stakes are no longer abstract. Lives are being lost every day, and we've witnessed that with the LA fires already. We've witnessed that in Africa with the prevailing droughts in sub-Saharan Africa.
Donald Trump being likened to a wrecking ball for climate change on certain international news platforms.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, the United States forced the Global South at COP29 to accept a low finance figure, saying that, Donald Trump's administration would essentially be giving less in the following year, which is 2025. But if we look under Joe Biden's administration, the US paused thousands of this liquefied natural gas permits. And under Trump, with his idea of around America First approach, this could be lifted. And this would set a danger for more aggressive oil and gas extraction, including fracking. But then if we look at it more critically, if rich countries truly believe, for example, in the climate emergency, they will not be derailed by the assuming of office by Donald Trump. They then should be willing to pay more rather than their fair share of climate finance, definitely not less, because the world has already dealt with the Trump presidency before, which also included, mind you, the withdrawal of the US from the Paris Agreement. And his return, I guess, could see a second exit from the agreement by America and the cancellation of its climate commitments. But this is a moment of profound apprehension in the global climate diplomacy, but not one to cower from in dread. Rather, it is a moment that calls upon on all of us to really exercise our moral duty to protect the planet and millions of vulnerable groups from the consequences of self-defeating climate denial and inaction. Previously, we've already witnessed the forceful mobilization of regional and global actors stepping up to create this robust movement for climate action and to accelerate the transition away from dangerous fossil fuels. So it's worked then, and it can work again. Our world needs an even stronger coalition of sensible people to counter the dangerous ignorance and potential blunders of the incoming president.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned his first term, Dean, because when we talk about Trump's first term in office as president, it can be described as sort of isolationist and America first insofar as foreign policy is concerned. And I wonder whether there will be this move for Congress to pull back on development programs. And as we know, many of those developing programs are in Africa.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a strong possibility around that, looking at the idea that the fossil fuel industry has already invested around $75 million to secure Trump's victory, and now they're expecting a return. So already by Trump appointing fossil fuel CEOs to key cabinet positions and planning to dismantle critical environmental protections, Trump is handing these companies a blank check really to expand their operations at precisely the moment we need to end fossil fuel extraction. Even if you look at the decision of financial heavyweights like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and even BlackRock to leave climate-focused groups as of today, this reflects a defensive posture rather than an outright rejection of sustainability goals, yes, but it does underscore the growing tension between the regulatory compliance, not just in the US, but also in Europe, where climate action remains a priority, and a hostile domestic landscape in the US. So that divergence between, for example, the United States and Europe on climate action is growing starker, and European financial institutions, for example, remain quite committed to stricter climate finance regulations and disclosure requirements, while American firms appear increasingly preoccupied with avoiding domestic political fallout. So there's this big divide, and also I think looking at it at an erosion of global climate cooperation. The United States financial sectors and their retreat in a way weakens the collective momentum needed to mobilize the capital for renewable energy and climate resilience projects across Africa, for example. And even the market fragmentation, if we look at the American firms prioritizing the short-term political gains over long-term climate risk, they're already risking falling behind in global markets where sustainable finance is actually becoming the norm.
Yeah, it's so interesting, this issue around the Paris Agreement, right? Because the argument is that, from the American side at least, is that Americans have too much of an economic burden on their businesses insofar as climate change is concerned. But actually, it's the other way around, right? Africa pays disproportionately higher costs for climate adaptation compared to the rest of the world. It means that the continent, if indeed things go the way they are projected to go insofar as climate change is concerned, once Trump takes that oath of office, Africa once again is on the back foot.
Yeah, definitely. The United States owes Africa a climate debt. The Paris Agreement actually symbolized the global recognition of climate change as this shared challenge requiring collective solutions. And for African nations, the agreement also offered us a framework for accountability and financial support from historically emitting countries. And the US, as one of the largest greenhouse gas emitters, could have potentially played a key role in this equation, particularly in funding climate adaptation and mitigation efforts in the global south. But Trump's withdrawal, or his potential rather, represented a breach of trust in the global climate pact. And it has sent a message that wealthy countries could essentially abandon their responsibilities, leaving vulnerable regions like Africa to bear the costs of a crisis they did not cause. Trump's potential decision has also underscored two stark realities. One is that the problem is the US is not a reliable partner. The second aspect is Africa cannot depend solely on external factors for climate solutions. You know, while global cooperation is essential, the US withdrawal has highlighted the need for African countries to assert greater agency in crafting their own climate and development strategies. African countries continue with endless cycles of sovereign debt crises that tend to weaken that degree of economic and monetary sovereignty, for example, and even reduce the fiscal policy space necessary to tackle the national priorities such as climate, health, education, infrastructure, and even public services. So as a result, Africa needs to get to a space where we cannot reproduce an extractive economic model that has historically destroyed our ecosystems and resulted in an energy crisis, food insecurity, socioeconomic exclusion. African economies have been historically locked at the bottom of the value food chain since colonial times, and Africa cannot continue to be the provider of cheap raw materials for others to feed their industrial development. And in order for us to deal with this, we need to come to terms on how we can actually tap into our existing potential, such as our abundant renewable energy resources and leveraging our green transition minerals to establish economic and climate resilient systems.
Yeah. So Trump has said, and it's been written across media organizations, he's preparing to sign more than 200 executive actions just on Monday as soon as he's inaugurated. We know that he's also said, Dean, many times over the past years that climate change is a hoax. And part of that, he wants to stop new windmills. He calls them windmills. We might know them as wind turbines being built offshore from day one. He says he wants to make that change from day one. According to Sky News, he wants to gut environmental rules roll back Joe Biden's landmark green legislation, unleash billions of clean energy incentives, and quote unquote unplug all the stops on US liquid gold. And of course, he's referring to oil.
Yeah, 100%. But we have to also understand that today the economics of clean, renewable energy are so obvious that not even Trump can hold back the process, particularly looking at the fact that climate science is undeniably clear, and looking at the position that is actually a dangerous and short-sighted ambition, which is why the wider climate movement has even labeled his proposed 200 presidential declarations as Trump's day one climate destruction package, which is really a reality check. And essentially, it is really a rallying call for everyone else across the world to actually implement genuine action. Because as I said earlier on, the stakes are no longer just simply abstract. Look at what we've endured across as Africa with the droughts, with the floodings as well, historically. And at the center, we've got people's lives actually being put at risk as a result of mainly really a capitalist imperialist system that seeks to perpetuate inequality and colonialism across the world. And that simply has to stop. But essentially, because we live in the world that we live in, we have to come to a position where we do have this political will coming out of our leaders. The moments are there. We've got the Africa Climate Summit coming up. How do we intend to position Africa, given the fact that we have abundant transition minerals? We've got the silicon, we've got the aluminium, we've got the platinum. How do we use that as a playing card within the green global economy to actually leverage the right financing in order for us to leapfrog towards cleaner energy systems, but at the same time unlocking the necessary developmental pathways necessary for us to realize our potential as a continent? South Africa has a role to play as well as the presidency overlooking the G20 this year. And this is actually the moment where I'm glad that the president earlier on in Rio in November last year prioritized just transition as one of the major key focus points for the South African presidency taking over the G20. And that really speaks towards the volumes as to why we actually need to tackle the climate emergency. It is not simply something that is a down the road problem. It's something that we're experiencing every day. And again, I want to reiterate this: lives are being lost every day.
And the next few years are incredibly important. Dean Bhebhe, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. Dean is a senior just transitions and campaign advisor at Power Shift Africa, as we look at the impact of the second term of a Trump presidency and the impact on climate change.